Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome to Scott's Synth Stuff. In 1970, Bob Moog released the Minimoog Model D, one of the most famous and iconic synthesizers of all time. It sold until 1981 was discontinued. Used versions of that synthesizer still come up on Reverb and other used synth sites for over $10,000. In 2016, Moog decided that they were going to reissue the synthesizer, and they did, building them like they do, about one at a time by hand, and they sold them for a couple of years and then quietly discontinued them. Those versions of the synthesizer, which had a few minor improvements, sell used for around $6,000 today. Well, today, Moog announced that they're now putting back into production the original Minimoog, yes, the same synthesizer with the same through-hole circuitry, hand-assembled one at a time, with, again, a few new features in it, and it's going to be available for $5,000, which is going to really annoy some of the people trying to sell the older used ones for more than that. Well, I'm wearing my Sweetwater shirt. I've got a great big box down here. I've got a packet of candy. I've got a new sticker. It's Sweetwater New Gear Day coming up next. Are you crazy? I'm not spending $5,000 on an analog monosynth from 1970. Even if it does sound as good as it does, it's still just an analog monosynth. There are plenty of VSTs that can emulate it reasonably well, and there's also hardware. There's been a number of different companies that have made their own version of the Minimoog over the years, and probably the most prevalent one is Behringer. They made the Poly D, which is kind of an expanded Minimoog, and then they made this, the rack mount Model D. Well, it's actually a desktop that you can rack mount, and that's what I've ordered today. We're going to throw it into my rack and see how it sounds. So the Model D is a fairly authentic recreation of the Minimoog with a few added features. It has MIDI, obviously. There are some more CV ins and outs. But other than that, it's basically true to the original. And if we figure out how to open this box, we will take it out and have a look. Now, I did also get it with these Eurorack ears that you can stick onto the synth so that you can mount it in a rack, which is what I'm going to do. Behringer actually makes this for the synth specifically. I don't see screws, but we'll have a look and see. Oh, look at that. They put a little Behringer logo right on the rack ears. Okay, so there's our rack ears. Are there any screws in here? No, I guess we use the screws in this thing. So let's open it up and have a look. Quick start guide in the manual, very nice. Power supply. And let's pull the unit out. Behringer knows that some people will be mounting this in a Eurorack, and for that reason, they actually make it so you can take this apart, and instead of having it in a desktop case like this, you can actually take off the back and just have the front panel mounted in a Eurorack, and then they give you the connections so that you can power it and have the sound going in and out of your Eurorack and your CV and gate and whatever else that you're going to use on it. So here's the Model D. It's a fairly small little thing. Nice knobs. I mean, it's Behringer, so it's going to be relatively inexpensive, which this is. And if we have a look at these rack ears, it looks like, that doesn't seem, oh, obviously it goes like this. So these screws must come out, and then you just mount that in place. So let's do that. Let's take these screws out. Whenever you're doing this type of work, never start the screw with a power tool, because if it's cross-threaded, you'll destroy it. So always start it by hand. Once you've got it threaded in a few threads, then go ahead and use the power tool to tighten it. Okay, so now it's ready to be racked. Very nice. Before we do that though, I want to have a look at the back here. There's two outputs. So these are not left and right, it's low and high. So this is where you would plug in. The low output is for like a guitar amp. High output is line level. This is just the MIDI channel that it's going to listen on. Defaults to 1 if it's all the way off. Power on and off, we're going to leave that on. And then obviously the power input. So because it's going to get racked, as you can see, you can't really have a cable sticking up if you've got something underneath it or right next to it. So for that reason, I actually bought a right angle cable, and yes, I believe these are balanced outputs, so we will plug this into the high output, the right angle there, and it looks like it should just barely fit, I think. We'll see how that goes. And no, it's not going to fit. All right, so I may have to do a little bit of modification to that cable. We'll see if we can maybe shave that down or something to give us a little bit extra room, or something else that we might be able to do. Let's see, we have this back cover that could come off. I wonder if we could maybe, and you know what? The power plugs can be the same deal. If we have no space above, the power plug is going to prevent us from racking it because it's just going to stick up there. That's kind of really poor design there. As you can see, the rack comes out like that. So we either have to put it down a space like that, which isn't the end of the world, or do some modifications. You know what? I think I'm just going to put it a space down, and that's what we'll end up doing. So it's not going to fit if it's right up. As you can see, it won't fit there, but if I move it down just one space and give it a little bit of a gap, that should work. Just thread in a screw to hold it there. Actually, you know what? That'll work fine because that little gap there gives me a space to run a MIDI cable or a USB cable for MIDI. So I think that'll actually turn out just fine. Get these bottom screws in and started. Boy, that doesn't line up very well. Why is that not lining up? It's almost like these screws are in the wrong position. How about on this side? Come on, Behringer, your rack mount ears don't have screws that fit the proper size. What's going on there? Maybe I have to move it down an extra, maybe it there? Nope, that doesn't fit either. It's not fitting with the standard rack screw spacing. Well, it's close, but it's not quite. If I pull it away maybe a little bit and then get it started, maybe I can force it in, which isn't ideal, but maybe what we have to end up doing. It really doesn't want to go in. Well, that's not going to work. What I may end up having to do is just using the top screws, because the bottom ones sure aren't going to do it. So you can see the top screws fit in, but the bottom screws don't line up. The hole is offset by, oh, it's a good 1/8 of an inch there. There's no way that screw is going to fit in there. And that's even with the top one pushed down as far as it'll go. All right, so I've got it hooked up and working. I do have it running up through my patch bay up into the X32 mixer up on the top here. I have the USB here set up. Because this is a class compliant USB device, I have the USB just running up into the Mio XL USB hub, which then routes it over my network to wherever else. I've currently got my DAW running, so I'm running Cubase. And I've got Cubase configured so that any MIDI that it sees coming from anywhere, from any other instrument, it will actually send it to the Model D so that I can play the Model D from any keyboard. I've got it hooked up to my System 8 because the System 8 will play arpeggios over MIDI. So if I play an arpeggio on there, that's a terrible one. That's better. So now I can play with the sounds. So I have actually played around with this quite a bit more than what you saw in the video. I've spent quite a bit of time underneath here hooking up wires, setting up MIDI routing, setting up routing in the mixer, getting it routed into the DAW, and then from the DAW back out, all that stuff. I didn't bother recording any of that because I thought that's boring. Who wants to see that? Honestly, if you're interested, you want to know how I actually do that, how I add something new onto the system and make it work, I can do a video on that if you're interested, but let me know in the comments below, and if you are, I will make a video that describes how I do that. As for the Model D, I'm actually pretty happy with it. For $260, you get pretty much the sound of a Moog Minimoog with the same control layout. I have played a actual Minimoog before, so I know how they work and I know pretty much how they sound, and this sounds like it. I mean, it sounds like I remember. The controls work the same way. If there is one thing I would tell Behringer to do, the way they ship this thing, it makes no sound at all, and there are so many controls that have to be set in order to get any sound out of it at all. Somebody that doesn't know subtractive synthesis or doesn't know the controls on a Minimoog or a Model D like this, because they're not exactly the way you would see in a modern subtractive synthesizer. We kind of have standardized filter, resonance, ADSR, and back in the 1970s, they didn't have those standardized terms and conventions, so Moog kind of just did their own thing, and Model D kind of brings that along. So, we don't have filter resonance, we have filter emphasis. Control is LFO, which is, modulation is what we call it today. The oscillators and mixer, we have pretty much the same, although the mixer works a little bit differently. This is amplifiers, which is actually the filter and the VCA, the envelope, the VCA envelope. So it did take probably 2 or 3 minutes of just messing with the controls to get this thing in a state where it was actually making sound. And I was actually wondering, okay, if I got something set up wrong in the mixer because I'm not hearing anything. And actually, what I ended up doing was turning on the A440 tuning sound, because that, regardless of what the rest of it is set up as, will actually generate an A440 hertz sound that you can use either for tuning it, or also you can use it to identify that, yes, the thing is working. All right, so I'm pretty happy with it. I expect I will be using it mostly for juicy low-end bass. That's really what I bought it for, because you can get just fantastic squelchy, fat analog bass out of this thing, and that's really what I was hoping to use it for. And for what I've heard, that's exactly what it's going to excel at. So I'm really quite pleased with it. $260, you can't complain about the price. Behringer, I think, really knocked it out of the park with this. I never was a Behringer fan. As you can tell, I now have a Behringer mixer, Behringer patch bays, a Behringer headphone amp, which I actually, those of you who may be sharp-eyed may have noticed that recently appeared That wasn't in my last video. I got rid of my old headphone amp. It was also a Behringer, but it was noisy and horrible, and replaced it with this thing. It allows me to also switch between the two mixers that I need to listen to, so I can switch between A and B just by pushing this button right here, which is really nice. It also lets you push this button here, which sums left and right and gives you a mono mix, so you can instantly check your mix in mono just by pressing that button. And because I was swapping the headphone jack back and forth between these two mixers for reasons I won't get into, but I was doing it on a regular basis. First I thought, well, I'm just going to get a switch that can switch back and forth, but then I didn't like the headphone amp because it was noisy, so I got this, which solves both issues, and it gives me some extra outputs for the headphones. So, I have vocalists and things, they can have headphones or in-ears or what have you. So yes, I've got that Behringer, and now I've got the Behringer Model D, and I gotta say, I'm not quite sure where all the hate is coming from Behringer, because these are pretty decent quality units. I mean, Behringer in the past has had some questionable hardware, but this stuff seems to be decent quality. I mean, and it works and does what it's supposed to do. Time will tell, of course, but until then, I'm happy to use it as it is, and it seems to do what it advertises it would do. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, corrections, please leave them in the comment section below. I read all of them. I try to respond to everybody. I really appreciate that you guys take so much time to comment on my videos and offer suggestions, which is really helpful. I would ask, please, if you like what you saw, click like, subscribe, click the little bell. It really helps us out when you do that, and plus you get notified every time we post one of these videos. Thanks for watching.